What are the implications for teaching of understanding identity in a much more powerful and complex way, as we've described? Well, it means having a repertoire. It means there is no single pedagogy or no single approach which will be entirely appropriate for an individual or for a group. So there are 7 kinds of orientations that we suggest will help with building a repertoire. First of all, of course, is identifying and defining the prior knowledge that every individual brings to learning. That is, valuing who they are and what they understand and bringing it into the learning experience. Secondly, adopting a flexible approach to learning, knowing when to adjust, seeing how a learner reacts, understanding what their needs are, and not just sticking to a set of instructional activities because they're listed on a page, but checking to see the degree to which a learner has actually engaged. Thirdly, of course, it would mean having a variety of knowledge processes, knowing when to select an instructional sequence or an activity, knowing how it relates to the individual as well as to the subject, and tracking its success. And fourthly, applying different emphasis and mixes of knowledge process according to the learner needs and the subject needs, differentiating learning for individuals and for groups as you're tracking their engagement and their performance over time. And fifth, of course, is identifying and negotiating learner pathways. All learners want to engage and want to achieve and be successful, but they might want to do it in different ways and in different patterns. A teacher has to be able to identify when that need is there and how to negotiate those learning pathways while still aiming for common goals. And sixth, knowing when to change direction of the knowledge flows to activate engagement, knowing when to ask the learner to lead a direction, to help get to another point, not being in control all the time, to allow the dignity that is required to each learner, given that they come in with experiences and complex orientations to the world. And finally, if we're going to take seriously learner differences and the importance of engagement, we have to be able to change the balance of command and responsibility. That is, to join with learners in achieving goals and setting pathways to the goal, allowing learners to feel that they have a voice in responding to what's being learned and knowing how they themselves can proceed and want to proceed.
Let me give an example now of how these differences play out symbolically in the literacy classroom. Symbolic differences, how they play out. So here's one historical model. All the kids had the generic readers which they had. Every kid had the same reader, and in that reader was the idealized family with the mother and the father and the boy and the girl in an ideally affluent universe where everyone's happy and everything's fun. And the assumption is that that's what every family is. Okay, so that's how you don't deal with symbolic differences amongst the learners in the classroom. I'm going to give you a couple of examples now of dealing with those symbolic differences. The first example is from a school in Mexico. This is Mario Lopez Gopar, some work that he did. And there is this indigenous cloak which has a whole pile of narrative, symbolic, religious meanings that go with it. Remember that idea of communities of commitment? So what kind of cultural commitments? Remember that idea of ethnos? What types of ethnic cultural identity are there in this community? And to bring that into the community, what he got the students to do was to label the symbolic elements on a piece of clothing. So what's multimodal about it? Well, it's actually something which in our definition is part of this gestural universe, which includes fashion. It involves a whole lot of visual imagery, iconic imagery. It involves narratives, telling the stories that go with it in order to explain what it means. So what this teacher is doing is they're bringing in symbolic differences in which students are immersed into the classroom in some profound kinds of ways. That's very different from the funny old basal readers where you were just given something which is this idealized reading text. And another example, this is another kind of multimodal example. This is by Karen Martin, and she's an Indigenous person in Australia who is from Stradbroke Island, which is off Queensland in Australia. And this is a work of art which was done in relation to a set of learnings in the classroom and with the kids, which is also a kind of a map, a symbolic map, a totemic map, a map of Indigenous culture, a map of the land, all those things all at once. So it's both space and it's image and it's narrative, and this is to bring something in from the student's own experience, the Indigenous student's own experience on Stradbroke Island. So these are some examples of incorporating or attending to and dialoguing with symbolic differences in the classroom.